You have increased central nervous system fatigue, so you've kind of, quote, lost your mojo. You can't hit that anaerobic capacity, so you have a greater predisposition to putting yourself into that overtraining or overreach state, getting some immune compromisation. So there's lots of little things that can tip a female athlete over the edge.
That Triathlon Show, episode 105. Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to another episode of That Triathlon Show, the podcast presented by scientifictriathlon.com. I'm your host, Michael, and on today's episode I interview Dr. Stacy Sims. We discuss training, nutrition, hydration, and recovery considerations that are specific for female athletes, because, as we'll get into in the interview, women are not small men, and most research in endurance sports is done with male college students, so it's not necessarily a representative sample. So Stacy is an exercise physiologist and nutrition scientist. Her role is as a senior research fellow at University of Waikato. I should have checked how to pronounce that. It's in New Zealand. I did not, so I might have gotten that wrong, but hopefully it's okay. Stacy specializes in sex differences with regard to things like exercise stress, heat stress, nutrition, recovery, and the impact of all of these things on health, body composition, and endurance performance. And she is finally also the author or co-author of the book Roar, Women Are Not Small Men, Stop Eating and Training Like One. So I think that subtitle is really good and tells you what it is about. Before we dive into the interview, this episode is sponsored by Precision Hydration. Andy Blow, founder of the company, recently wrote a great blog post on how much dehydration you can tolerate during an Ironman. And in a nutshell, the sweet spot is likely highly individual and may even be a bit different for the same athlete on different days and in different climates. But it probably falls in the 2 to 4% body weight range for most people. So that is something that I will link to in the episode description if you want to read that post. And of course, as a That Triathlon Show listener, you will get your first box or tube of Precision Hydration electrolyte product for free when you use the code ThatTriathlonShow, all one word, on precisionhydration.com. And note that previously this campaign was running until the end of February, but that's actually something that I recently talked to Dave at Precision Hydration about, and we'll extend that offer so it's valid for the time being. So go ahead and use that. This episode is also sponsored by Triathlon Corner, the triathlon webshop on triathlon-corner.store. That's your go-to place whether you're looking for a new wetsuit, running shoes, bike computers, or power meters. They've got you covered. And right now, all That Triathlon Show listeners can get 10% off all purchases by using the discount code ThatTriathlonShow, all one word, all caps, just like the Precision Hydration code on, again, triathlon-corner.store. Alright, let's get on with the show and listen to Dr. Stacy Sims. Alright, so on today's episode of That Triathlon Show, I'm welcoming Stacy Sims, PhD, to the show. Stacy, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. This is a very, very requested episode because there have been a lot of female athletes writing in, and they want to hear more about if there are specific considerations for that population, and that's what you specialize in. Can you just briefly break down exactly what, in terms of the female training, nutrition, physiology, it is that and everything that you do that you're an expert in, basically?
Oh, wow. How long do we have?
30 seconds.
Very brief. So pretty much everything that's out there on training and nutrition from a scientific perspective has been done on 18 to 22-year-old college-age men. And when you start to look how that affects women, women are leaving a lot on the table with regards to performance potential because they are training and recovering like men. And we have a menstrual cycle and different hormones that really perturb the way that we respond to things. And once you start taking that into account, you can get that extra performance potential out for the women so they improve across the board.
Okay, brilliant. That's you hit that 30 seconds right on the head. So that's perfect. Let's start with training, perhaps. What different considerations come into play with training for women compared to men?
Yeah, so I guess the basis of it is to look at a woman's menstrual cycle. So when we talk about that, a typical cycle is 28 days, where day one is the first day of bleeding. And the onset of bleeding is because estrogen and progesterone drop. So the first 2 weeks of a woman's cycle, so day 1 to 14, this is where they can really work to improve their strength and their overall top end power, their their anaerobic capacity. And then when they start getting to the high hormone phase, which is day about 20 to 28, this is where estrogen and progesterone are at their highest, and it's really hard to hit that top end. So if you're thinking about how to scope training and recovery, you work with that cycle where you want to put the really high, hard, intense work those first 2 weeks, and then look at about the 5 to 7 days before the menstrual cycle starts again or the bleeding starts again, and use that more as a maintenance or a steady state phase. And this can go across the board from, all of the endurance stuff to also strength. There's been some really good, tidy studies that have come out looking at strength training and showing that women who do 5 days of strength training for those first 2 weeks and then back it down and do more of a maintenance phase in the last week before the bleeding starts actually gain more lean mass and lose more body fat than women who do that typical 3 times a week across the board for 4 weeks. So there's some really interesting stuff that's coming out about training in and around the menstrual cycle, and that's the way you can maximize potential.
Yeah, that's very useful and something that I've had this discussion with some athletes that I coach as well, and it's great for both women but also for coaches that are coaching female athletes to learn more about this. So great. Is there a risk for, even you mentioned that it's more difficult to hit the high power and anaerobic stuff in days 21 to 28, you said, of the cycle, but are there also bigger risks of even getting sick or overtraining, or just more difficult to recover in that period, or anything else that happens there?
Yeah, so the high hormone phase, specifically what happens is your core temperature is elevated, you lose more total body sodium, you have a harder time recovering because progesterone is catabolic, so it's harder to repair the muscles. You have increased central nervous system fatigue, so you've kind of, quote, lost your mojo. You can't hit that anaerobic capacity, so you have a greater predisposition to putting yourself into that overtraining or overreach state, getting some immune compromisation. So there's lots of little things that can tip a female athlete over the edge. And if you're not paying attention to what specifically you're doing in that high hormone phase, that last week before bleeding starts, you might just tip yourself over the edge. So that's where it becomes more of a key point.
Got it. And what about nutrition and hydration? If we bring those into the discussion as well, how do they should they change with the cycle somehow?
Yeah. So again, when we think about you have this carbohydrate intake that you have per hour, and there's a few things to consider that aren't necessarily phase related, where women have a reduction in their ability as compared to men to absorb fructose. So, for example, men can absorb 66 grams of fructose per 100. Women can only absorb 26. And that's across the board. So when you're thinking about their typical sport nutrition products, women will...
But is that per 100 grams of carbs total that men can absorb 66 and or
Oh, not
yeah,
carbs,
okay.
fructose. So when you're thinking about a typical, sport nutrition product that's a mix of maltodextrin, glucose, and fructose, women can't absorb maltodextrin or fructose as well as men. So it sits in the gut, and women are also more predisposed to having gastrointestinal distress because estrogen causes a little bit more of the inflammation and leaky gut. So when you're thinking as estrogen rises at ovulation and in the high hormone phase, there's a higher predisposition for leaky gut. And then when you're introducing your typical sport nutrition products in there with a higher amount of fructose and maltodextrin because it's been primarily tested on men, then again, it can cause severe GI distress. And I can't tell you how many female athletes email me and say, should I be taking Imodium? I'm afraid of, having diarrhea on the run of my Ironman. And you're like, okay, well, let's see what phase you're in. Let's back it down. Let's work with inflammation. Let's take away some of this fructose and other things that you're ingesting. And then it's a non-issue. But when we're thinking specifically across the menstrual cycle, women have an ability to conserve more carbohydrates. So they don't need as much in the first 2 weeks because their body can access it really well. But as estrogen rises, it also inhibits carbohydrate coming from the muscle. So it facilitates free fatty acid use, which in some regards is good. But the flip side of that is you can't hit intensities or anything that you're used to. So you need to take in a little bit more carbohydrate.
Yeah, so you have that. So you're saying that you can't really tap into those carbohydrate stores. So you need to take in carbohydrate. Is that in workouts or is that in general day-to-day nutrition as well?
In workouts. So
In workouts.
if you're thinking about how are you going to maximize your training, you want to fuel before, during, and after, and then the rest of your diet is kind of arbitrary for the most part. So if you're thinking about, I have this high intensity workout and it falls a few days before my period starts and I'm not that sure I'm going to be able to hit those intensities, then add a little bit more carbohydrates so you can hit those intensities. But if you were to do that same workout a week later after your period starts, then you don't have to add that extra carbohydrate. Your body's primed and ready to go because it can access all the fuel that it needs to hit those intensities.
Okay, perfect. But then they should obviously check the package of the gel or the sports drink and make sure that it's not too high in fructose to get that right as well. What about hydration? Is that something that changes or are there general differences that we can go into right now between women and men when it comes to hydration needs?
Yeah, so this is another big contention because there's different schematics to think about. When we think about hyponatremia, that's coming to the forefront of a lot of races now. People are experiencing hyponatremia, so this is where your drink to thirst comes from. Women, again, are more predisposed to hyponatremia, and it's not because they have slower times or larger body surface areas. It's because their body kicks out more total body sodium because of progesterone. And they sit clinically closer to hyponatremia than men from a standpoint of what their blood measures. So they are predisposed to it. So they need to think about what are they eating? What are they drinking? Let's drink something that's functional. So not a typical sports drink. It's too high in carbohydrate. There's not enough sodium and potassium to help fluid availability. So there's lots of thought process that goes into what a woman should be drinking and what a woman should be eating, because it's not about electrolyte replacement. It's all about fluid availability. So if you are eating and drinking stuff with sodium in it, and the stuff that you're drinking is part of the new generation of the lower carbohydrate, higher electrolyte content, then it attenuates that hyponatremia risk. The other factor to consider is when a man and a woman both do the same race and they're similar times, when they finish, a man's blood sodium level will be higher than the woman's because men tend to finish endurance events with hyper Natremia, meaning higher blood sodium levels, and women tend to be on that lower end. And that's a specific sex difference. So when you're starting to look at the literature and see all this drink to thirst stuff, um, there's a little bit of a nuance there because, again, they're not taking the sex difference into consideration. The other thing is that your thirst sensation alters as you start going longer and longer. And in men, the salty and the sugar sensation from a drink is not as strong as it is for women. So women will drink something like a Gatorade or a Powerade when they're 2 or 3 hours into a race and they're like, oh, I can't drink it anymore. And a man will be like, nah, it's all right. It's because this palatization is still another sex difference. So women will tend to drink less than they need to. And then they'll be super thirsty and then just start drinking the water. And this, again, predisposes to hyponatremia. And then the last thing on top of that is in that high hormone phase, a woman's plasma volume, so the water part of her blood, drops by 8%. So she's already starting a race compromised with the water fluid availability for sweating. So women need to pay a little bit more attention to what they're drinking, how they're drinking, and what phase of their menstrual cycle they're in to prevent getting into these clinical issues.
That last thing that begs the question: if you have a maybe more competitive goal and you want to really maximize performance, should you plan what race you do based on your cycle so that you're not in a phase where anyway you have all these other things that you mentioned, not being able to hit intensities, but also decreased blood plasma volume is going to be a big detriment to endurance performance. So is that something that you recommend doing, planning the races based on your cycle?
No, because then it becomes too difficult. And the reason why I say that is we know all this stuff that happens with the menstrual cycle, and we can put it out there and say all of these things, but it's not a fear factor. And it's not like, oh, now I have to plan my race because I'm not going to race well. It's knowing this and then putting specific interventions in to prevent the negativity of those high hormone phases. It's the same as like someone who has patellofemoral syndrome, and you're like, well, you have this race to do, but leading up to it,
you're talking to that guy.
Okay, so leading up to it, you're going to do all the things possible to avoid the pain, right? So you're going to be taping, you're going to be rehabbing, you're going to be taking NSAIDs, and doing everything to get to the race as good a condition you possibly can. So when we think about the menstrual cycle, you're training around the menstrual cycle, you're altering your nutrition to enhance its adaptations. And then most likely because of stress, your cycle is going to change. And I can't tell you how many women are like, my period's going to come on race day, no matter how well they've planned everything. So this is where you're like, okay, 5 to 7 days before your period starts, we're going to work on dampening the inflammation response that these hormones cause. So you're taking magnesium, you're taking zinc, you're taking an omega-3 fatty acids. You are looking at specifically changing your race and training nutrition to increase the amount of carbs and sodium that's in there. You're recovering well by increasing the amount of protein that you're taking post-exercise and throughout the acute recovery period. So there's specific nutritional interventions that you can do to mitigate all of these supposed negative effects. And then it becomes a moot point.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and when you put it that way, and I think that's a good segue actually to talk a little bit about your book Roar, which goes into these topics, so that the listeners can find out all the specific details, I guess, on these things. So, can you talk about Roar just a little bit?
Oh yeah, Roar. It came about kind of in a conversation that I was having with Celine Yeager, my co-author, where she was involved in quite a few of the women's camps I was doing when I was working with Osmo, and did quite a bit of stuff with her when she was writing with bicycling, and she's like, we need to put this in a book. So instead of me going off and doing seminars and podcasts, we put it all in a book. So it's pretty much a review of all the literature and then disseminating it out. So it talks about, are you pregnant? Are you not? Are you menopausal? Are you not? Are you on an OCP? Are you not? Are you regularly cycling? how to change your nutrition, how to change your training, how to adapt to the heat, how to use pee sticks to really dial in your nutrition. Everything from like how to counter premenstrual syndrome and the bloating. You're not leaning up. Are you in low energy availability? What is your body type? How can you eat for that? So it goes into all the details and everything that I think women need to know and probably don't know. So pick a chapter, talk about it.
Yeah, and the sub headline, "Women are not small men. Stop eating and training like one." I think that sums it up pretty well. So we'll have it linked to in the show notes and the episode description, so people can go in and have a look. You mentioned there if the pregnancy and menopause. Can we talk a little bit about first pregnancy? Are there any specific things to consider for training nutrition during pregnancy?
Yeah, this is an interesting one because it's very hard to get research ethics to study pregnant women. So most of the research out there is case studies, a little bit of anecdotal stuff, and then there are some controlled trials that aren't intervention trials, they're more observational. And the thing about it is if you are fit and racing and you become pregnant, just keep going, keep doing it. You're going to top up your calories, but not eat for two because you don't need more than 150 to 200 calories extra a day for the first trimester. Second trimester might be 300. The last trimester might be 400 to 500. So women think, oh gosh, I'm pregnant, I need to eat more. Just a little bit more, but think about what you're eating and the fact that you're growing something and you're regenerating yourself. So you want it to be really good food, paying attention to your B vitamins and some of the more important vitamins that your doctor is going to tell you about. But when it comes to training, don't stop because you feel like you're going to impede or hurt the baby. There's a few things that aren't discussed. One, when you are exercising and you cut off a little bit of the blood flow to the uterus and the growing fetus, it's not harmful in the fact that that response is going to increase capillarization of the placenta. So then the baby gets increased blood flow. There's also lots of research out there to show that if you are continuously exercise as an athletic woman, then you're downplaying the genetic predisposition for the baby to become obese or develop diabetes or develop cardiovascular disease. So you're setting up a really great DNA blueprint for your baby.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. And there's all this worry about going anaerobic. Your body does not let you go anaerobic when you become pregnant. It's like a fail-safe mechanism. You try to go hard and your body's like, no, you can't do it. And then you hear things like, I still have women whose doctors are like, you can't run, you're going to shake the baby loose. No, the baby is in the uterus and is wrapped in the amniotic sac and it's a cushion for the baby. You're not going to shake anything loose. So unless you have some kind of medical condition that tells you need to stop exercising, keep moving, because the worst possible thing you could do is stop. Because if you're fit and you become unfit, then it's very harmful to the baby. If you are fit and you keep going, then you are actually benefiting the baby.
Yeah, I did an entire episode on training during pregnancy with Jocelyn McCauley, and she said that she did a run like 24 hours before going into labor. She did a run on the treadmill and ran right through all the time, all the way up until labor, basically, with just a 24-hour recovery period there. So I'll link to that as well for listeners that want to look at more details about that. What about post-pregnancy? Are there any special considerations there?
Yeah, the first, oh my gosh, there's so much people don't tell you after having a kid. It doesn't matter what the books say. Like, you need to talk to somebody who's actually had a kid. And I'm one of those people, but I'll spare all the details. But when you first get out of the hospital with a baby, you still look a little bit pregnant because everything's swollen. The uterus has to contract. Your hip bones are a bit wider. Your pelvis has spread. Everything's a little bit lax. So for that first 6 weeks, it's as if you've broken a bone. Put that in your head. And the fact that you're not going to go running, you're going to just do lots of easy stuff. You're healing, your body's healing. You're trying to develop milk to breastfeed. So don't think about running, just lots of light activity, nothing straining. And think of it as active recovery from a race. And then when you are 6 weeks past and you go to your physician, then most likely will give you the okay. You want to do a lot of pelvic floor work. You also want to make sure that your pelvic bones are realigned. Many women have lots of difficulty riding and running after they have a child because the pelvic bones have widened to give birth. And sometimes when they close, there's some pelvic torsion or there could be some other misalignment. And then when you get back into training, you'll start to have a lot of pain and ligamental and bone injury. And it's because you're not aligned. So make sure you get that alignment corrected and then get back into your training. And people are like, well, what about breastfeeding? It's fine. You're going to take some calories in, pump before you do anything anaerobic, and then you can feed the baby. So it becomes more of a timing thing with breastfeeding and activity.
And finally, what about menopause? What are the considerations that goes into that period?
So the biggest thing that menopausal women need to think about is protein and power, the two P's. So you start to lose muscle integrity. You also start to lose the ability to have fast contractions. So you want high quality protein, not soy, not rice, not pea. There's not enough leucine in there. And you want to do more power-based training, not long, slow endurance training. So when you start thinking about that and changing your training a little bit to have more of that high intensity stuff and increasing your protein, it mitigates some of that abdominal adiposity that is so endemic in menopausal women. It's because your body becomes more sensitive to carbohydrate and you need more protein. And when you look at the general recommendations that come from a physician's office, they're like soy protein and, increase your carbohydrate intake to help with hot flashes. Those two things from a physiological standpoint and the research purpose, when you're looking through the literature, are the exact opposite things that a menopausal woman should do. They should increase their good protein from whey, casein, fish. If you're vegan, then you have to look at using a combination of pea and quinoa to increase the leucine content, or using vegan branched chain amino acids. Looking around 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, downplaying carbohydrate except for in and around training, so that you are able to increase lean mass development, attenuate that body fat gain, and then keep training hard.
2 grams of protein per kilogram body weight. That's the same amount that's recommended for endurance athletes doing 2 to 3 hours on average per day of exercise. I just did a review of the joint position statement from the American Sports College, Medicine Sports College, and some other entities. So that's pretty interesting to see that even though they may not be training that much, they need that amount of protein. So yeah. Very interesting. What about, well, you mentioned they're doing more power-based training, recovery needs for that, and how do you kind of, from a training perspective and planning and structuring your training, integrate the sometimes often increased recovery needs for aging athletes with doing more of that power-based training that they need?
So when you think about you have to take training history into consideration, and most of us have a huge endurance training base. So it's swapping out some of those long, slow endurance type stuff, which still require pretty good amount of recovery, and putting in short, sharp stuff. So it can be in the gym, it can be on the bike, it can be doing running intervals. And then if you're giving yourself 36 hours of recovery, you can end up doing 2 days of work, but a longer amount of recovery if one workout's in the morning and the other one is the second afternoon. So you're just manipulating your training from morning to afternoon, morning, lunchtime, whatever, to give yourself that longer bit of recovery without compromising your training week.
Okay, got it. Perfect. And before we move into the rapid fire questions, I have one listener question. We sort of covered it, but can you just clarify still briefly the difference in recovery needs between female and male athletes? Do they exist and what are they?
Yeah, so there's a specific recovery window that we always talk about. You hear you need carbohydrate and protein within 30 to 45 minutes. And again, that's based on the recovery window of men. And when you look at the sex differences, women come down to complete baseline after 90 minutes. Men can have 3 to 18 hours, depending on how intense that exercise session was. It doesn't really change that much for women. And we always talk about putting carbohydrate in to replenish the glycogen stores. But the first and foremost thing that women need to be aware of is, because progesterone is catabolic and you're never without progesterone, your first thing is to start that muscle anabolism. You want to kickstart into repairing the muscle, and you want to get that cortisol as low as possible. So within that first 30 minutes, you're looking at 25 to 30 grams of really good high quality protein with, maybe 50 to 60 grams of carbohydrate to facilitate that protein uptake. If you do that, that opens up your window for glycogen recovery to 2 hours instead of just 45 minutes. But for men...
Yeah, go on, sorry.
I was going to say, but for men, you can do 20 grams of protein with, you can do that 4-to-1 or 3-to-1 ratio of protein to carbohydrate and recover really well.
Yeah, that's really good. And I'm just sitting here thinking that, wow, I learned so much today that it's been a long time since I learned so much in a single podcast episode. I just had this discussion with post-workout nutrition and realized that I kind of gave the advice that is apparently applicable for men, but not necessarily for female to a female. So you learn something every day, don't you?
You do. Always learning. I'm always learning. Yeah. I just hope I stay at least 3 months ahead of everyone else.
Yeah, that's a good goal to have. Okay, so let's move into the rapid fire questions. Take just 1 or 2 sentences to answer these. And the first one is, what's your favorite book, blog, or resource related to triathlon or endurance sports?
I don't have one. I know I should, but I don't, because I'm so wrapped up with research and stuff here that I don't have time to do anything else.
Well, research counts. Research counts, and it can be nutrition, your field of expertise. It can be a Twitter account, the researcher you follow.
Gosh, I don't.
Okay.
A listserv that comes through. I'm like, oh, that's from fertility, that's from nutrition, that's from sports science, that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I'm enjoying the experimental physiology, myth and methodology section. That one's interesting.
Okay. What's your favorite piece of gear or equipment, if you have one?
A bike trailer, because then my kid can ride her bike with me.
Nice. And finally, who's somebody in endurance sports or nutrition research that you admire and look up to?
Nina Stockenfeld. Nina Stockenfeld is out of the J.B. Pierce lab at Yale, and she has been doing a lot of research in the past 20, 25 years on progesterone and estrogen and how it affects fluid balance in women and men. And she's just really spot on with the research, very humble, but very direct and smart.
Great. So where can the listeners find out more about you and follow you if they want to do so? And also mention the name of your book again so that they remember it. We'll have that linked up in the show notes, of course.
Yeah, there's 2 places. The Dr. Stacy Sims Facebook page. There's also a link to Roar there, the book. And then the University of Waikato, I have a staff page and I update that regularly with the research projects that I'm working on, students that I'm working with, and studies that I need participants for.
Brilliant. All right. Thank you so much, Stacy. It's been really great talking to you, and I learned a lot, and I'm sure the listeners will as well. It was a real pleasure having you on the show.
Thanks again. It's been fun.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, if you're still listening too, I really hope that this was a super useful episode for you. It definitely was for me as a coach. My key takeaways, there are quite a few here, but plan your training according to your menstrual cycle is something that can be super important. And what Stacy said is that in the high hormone phase, days 21 to 28, it's not ideal to do intensity, so maybe take that as a scheduled easier week, or recovery week if you want to call it that. The second point I wanted to make is that you may need to take on more carbs during exercise in that phase as well, or in races for that matter, because your body can't access its carb stores in the same way as normal, so you need those exogenous carbs to be able to have the carb availability in the muscles to go at a higher intensity, if that's something that you still need to do. Also, in general, one of the differences between men and women is you need to focus especially on fluid availability by planning your hydration strategy properly, and you can find a lot of information about that, of course, on precisionhydration.com. So plan that properly with a focus on both the fluid and the sodium component of it. So again, just some electrolyte product so that you get your sodium and your fluid in, whether it's precision hydration or something else. If you prefer something else, it's fine, but make sure that you plan that properly and don't make it just an afterthought. Finally, post-workout nutrition. This is something that, as I said in the interview, I did not know about at all. So for women, you need more protein, at least relatively speaking, compared to men. Good high quality protein, and the ratio of carbs to protein that you take in post-exercise is not the same as that for men. For men, it's the ratio is higher on the side of carbs. So, for example, we mentioned the 4-to-1 ratio of carbs to protein, and that seems to apply pretty well for men. But for women, the ratio would be lower. You'd still take on carbs and more carbs than protein, but not to the same extent as the guys would have to do. So that was a lot of information that we covered in this show, and if you want to check something out, then as always you can go to the show notes on thattriathlonshow.com. Make sure that if you have any questions or comments about this episode, comment on the show notes. That's something that I highly recommend you doing. I get quite a lot of emails, but I'm much better responding to the comments, honestly, because I need to focus on things like actually producing the podcast so that thousands of listeners can hear it rather than responding to individual emails, and of course focusing on coaching the athletes that I coach. So that's why I prefer it if you ask your questions in the comments section on the website, because that way when I answer your question, all of the other listeners that go to check out the show notes will see that as well, and I can help many people at the same time, and I don't need to answer the same question over and over again. And while you're on the website, by the way, if you're interested in getting any help in improving your training and racing this season, check out the services that I offer, like customized training plans, consultations. I am so obsessive compulsive when I create custom training plans, so much so that I should probably stop doing it, just because my hourly rate for that particular service is probably something like on the level of a janitor in a developing country, but I really like to do it as well. So if that's something that you're interested in, check that out and email me. And as for the consultations, same thing really. I have a guarantee that we won't hang up the phone or close down Skype until you feel that you've tripled your investment. So there you go. I just wanted to mention those things. I think coaching and guidance, they are the high leverage investments that are worth making for any triathlete if you want to improve. The next episode of the podcast is one that I'm really super excited about. I interview my teammate Katarina Larsson and my coach Andrea Campos, and we talk about how you go from being an adult onset triathlete like Katarina was, starting as an adult, new to swimming and everything, and then become really, really competitive as a normal age grouper with a normal job, normal challenges from both the athletes and the coaches' perspective. And Katarina has won 3 gold medals in the European Championships, age group championships, I should say. So she has become really, really competitive. So that's what's coming up. And before we go, thank you so much to our amazing sponsors who keep this show up and running. Triathlon Corner is the new online home of shopping the best triathlon products in the world to great prices, and even better now that you can get 10% off your purchases by using the discount code ThatTriathlonShow, all one word, all caps, on triathlon-corner.store. And thank you to Precision Hydration. If you are interested in taking them up on their offer to get your first box for free, then make sure to first take the free online sweat test that you can find on precisionhydration.com. That will give you a personalized hydration strategy for your next race, and you will know exactly which ones of their products, which electrolyte strength to add to your shopping cart. Again, that discount code as well is That Triathlon Show, all one word, all caps, to get your first box for free. And finally, thank you as always for listening. Keep training smart and keep loving triathlon.